Had an interesting conversation the other day about Travis Etienne, and someone asked me, is he ever going to really be worth that first round pick? And I told them it's irrelevant, but yeah, I think so. I'll tell you why in just a second.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is your team every day, and we thank you for making us your first listen here on Locked On Jaguars. I'm the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast. My name is Tony Wiggins, and you can find us over on YouTube where you can subscribe for free. Make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and then hit the bell so you get notifications each and every time we drop an episode. And then wherever you listen to your podcast, when you're riding in your car, at work, or you're doing dishes or whatever, make sure you tap into that location each and every time we drop an episode so you don't miss one. Shout out to the everydayers for joining us here every single day on Locked On Jaguars. You could be an everyday or two. All you got to do is join us here every single day. All right, here's what we're going to run down today. That it will be all about explosiveness and big plays for the Jacksonville Jaguars in the running game if we are ever going to really get a true appreciation for Travis Etienne and his abilities. In segment 2, I'll tell you how he can get help from the others. That would be Tank Bigsby, as well as the passing game, to help Travis Etienne get the realization of where he was picked. The main thing is going to come down to, in my opinion, is winning. And if they win, everyone will look at that all of the parts came together and everything was for the greater good. If they don't win, then people will start nitpicking at how the team was constructed. And one of the first things they're going to point to, obviously the first thing going to point to is Trevor Lawrence. But in that same draft, in that same first round, you got Travis Etienne and this discussion of whether or not they should have used the first round pick on a running back and if they'll ever get an ROI, return on investment. And that's where we're going to park right here early in the podcast. We're going to talk about will the Jags get a return on Etienne. Individually, I will say from the time they chose Travis Etienne, it was going to be an uphill battle for them to get a return on investment that will match up to where he was picked, based on the fact that there were so many arguments about the positional value of running backs. And that no matter what, you don't take one that high. Atlanta's still dealing with it right now with Bijan Robinson, even though they act like they didn't even have him. I don't know why they picked him. But when you get running backs that were picked later, that with much less fanfare, and they lead the league in rushing, like in LA, there's always with Kyron Williams, there's always just going to be people that are going to second guess team building. And I know there's some out there right now, and I totally get it, that think like, doesn't matter, we got him, why are we even talking about this? Well, we're talking about this because he's one of the best players on the team, and we have to focus on his entire journey, the journey for him to get here. And we're not saying that they're not going to be good with him and he won't make a significant contribution. I'm saying that the expected contribution I believe he is going to make will kill some demons, if you will, about where he was picked, whether it was worth it. The biggest thing, he has to get to a second contract, and that's the big deal. And if he's going to get to a second contract, it's because the team is having some success, and he is a player who is like irreplaceable in an Alvin Kamara type way. He's a player that is irreplaceable, that he's too much a part of the DNA and the offense and the identity of the team. And that's where I'm going this year, with identity. And that's where I think is going to make the biggest impact on how we feel about Travis Etienne, not only just now, but towards the future. There are some things that we can do to help Travis Etienne. And I know I mentioned Tank Bigsby as one of those things, but there are other things that we can do to really help him. Let's look at his stats, first of all, and see what type of player on paper. We know who the Jaguars, I'm not going to assume that everybody listening to this is someone who has actually watched him play. This is going to be his fourth year, technically, Third year on the field. He got hurt in the preseason, his rookie year, and he missed the entire season. Since then, he has had 487 carries for 2,100 yards. That's a little bit over 1,050 yards per season. 1,066, I think, if we're going to be correct with my Duval County education. 17 total touchdowns, 16 on the ground, including the playoffs. And one receiving in the air, one reception in the air, 792 yards receiving on 93 receptions over the last couple of seasons. So what you're looking at is 2,800 yards. You're looking at 1,400 yards a year, 1,500 yards a year, something thereabouts, which is pretty good with 8.5 touchdowns. It felt better his second year because he had a better season. He had more of an impact that year, but it also felt better. And this will go back to something that I said. It felt better because the team was more successful. The team was winning. That's what it comes down to. Winning cures everything. Because when you win, it just looks like everyone is making this team-wide contribution, and no one's really worried about their own statistics. And that the end result is the reason why you're winning, because you got a whole bunch of good players doing a whole bunch of stuff, and not one of them's going to get too much credit for the whole machine. Sometimes in the NFL, it doesn't work like that, though. And what people really want to see is, especially in critical times, they want to see that guy who is that guy be that guy. All right. And when a team uses a first round pick on a non-traditional or a non-value position based on the norms and mores of the NFL, you got to be special. I don't know if he's been special, but I don't think the fact that we haven't necessarily seen him be consistently special is his fault either. There's a lot of things that go into, if you can't block. I think someone said that one of the stats said that Travis Etienne was the dude that was hit the quickest once the ball was snapped. He got more contact early than any other running back. It's like as soon as you get it, bang. And that tells me that somebody can't block. And we all know who I think that somebody is. And maybe this year, hopefully, with a little bit of luck and fortune, that's one of the things that gets fixed. Stating his value without looking at and his impact, more or less his value and his impact, stating his value and his impact with looking at just stats or what you know from his performance, and not giving credit. And I use the word credit very lightly, but not giving credit to those things around him, because credit could be a bad thing too, right? Like, this is your responsibility, or this is why this didn't happen. I think it's a little bit disingenuous. So that's why, more or less, I believe how we feel about Travis Etienne as we get to the end of his rookie contract, where I think the Jaguars already actually exercised the 5th-year option. So if that's the case, as we get into year 4, it's okay for us to take inventory. But I'm not going to say yay or nay on whether or not it was a bad draft pick, because one, he's been a good player, but two, one of the things that you want to see is what happens now moving forward. And what's going to happen from this point and moving forward, not only with Travis Etienne individually, but team-wise, will have more effect on how you feel about whether or not that was a good or bad draft pick in the first place. So it's only right that we discuss some of those things and what those things are, right? Like Tank Bigsby, that's one thing. Like scheme, like staying healthy, like all of those other things. So we ain't going to leave Travis out there. Whether or not we give Travis Etienne his flowers, and whether or not we do that, all of it isn't on him. I'm going to tell you about some of those other things in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by Yahoo Finance. That's right, man. When you have multiple things that you are doing in the investment world, sometimes it's good to make sure you have those things all in one place. And Yahoo Finance is the leader when it comes to having your entire portfolio all in one place. And you can make sure that you do that. Wouldn't it be great if you could see everything retirement accounts all in one place. That's right. That's right. It has to be Yahoo Finance, because Yahoo Finance is the flat out real deal. With a community of over 90 million users each month, the real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. The number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. All right, here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. I'm Tony Wiggins, the host of said podcast. We're talking about Travis Etienne, and we're talking about ain't nothing happened, ain't nothing going on. Fifth-year option has been picked up. Travis Etienne is going to be a Jaguar for at least another 2 years. At least another 2 years. I'd actually like to see him get an extension as early as, say, next season. Even when he's on the fifth-year option, do it a little bit earlier. Now, this is where you probably could get a little bit of a discount. If you keep him around, you extend it for 3 years, that means you have him for a minimum of 8. So it's worth it now, right? And I think a lot of times when we talk about running backs, when people don't think it's worth it, they think it's because the running back's going to get hurt. Or that folks say, well, you don't pay a 26-year-old running back, a 26 or 27-year-old running back. You don't pay a guy on his second contract. So those are the reasons why people say you shouldn't draft one, because when you make a draft pick, we have talked about this a lot. When you make a draft pick, it is almost, you want a first round pick to be a career pick. You hope to at least get 2 contracts, okay, out of your first round pick. But if by the very nature you don't pay running backs that hit their second contract, then that means you shouldn't have used the draft pick in the first place on that position. And that's why people do that. There are so many examples of how a guy can be a good player and have an impact, but the impact was had for a very short period of time. And then you make the decision that you shouldn't pay him moving forward when he's 26 years old. So Travis Etienne is 25. He won't be 26 until the offseason next year. I think after year 4, depending on this year, I think it'll go real well. We'll talk about some of the things that can help that year go real well. Go ahead and put him up for a couple, at least 2 or 3 more years. Get 7 or 8 years of continuity from him. And that means that with the exception of the one season that he missed, I expect him to be a very, very pivotal player for the Jaguars over the next few years or the next couple of years. So what that means is it would have been worth it, at least from the standpoint of return of investment, of how much productivity or how long did you get certain productivity from a guy that you used the first round pick on. That's how it has to happen. But it's also made easier if the team wins. Of course, we mean when we say win, ultimately we're talking about a Super Bowl. But in this case, getting to the playoffs, being a divisional winner, being a really good second round playoff team, just having that continuity and that production. Give them 1,200 yards and another 300 yards receiving, and maybe a total of 15, 16 touchdowns in one season. And people will go, yeah, he's a big part of the team. They're winning. He's healthy. You got to get some minutes out of Tank. You can't have a situation where you think you got to leave Etienne in the game and wear him all down, Derrick Henry style. You ain't going to be able to do that with him. That's not the kind of player he is. So in order for you to feel comfortable enough for him to be on the sideline, that means the backup, Tank Bigsby, who's a third-round pick, he just has to get out of his own way. You got to get out of your own way if you Tank Bigsby. Bad things can't happen when you're in the game. And he had some bad luck. And then things started to take on a life of his own, and it seemed like it started to mess with his confidence a little bit. So if you can get what you're supposed to get out of Tank, and then Johnson, the other backup, Dearness, keep Travis Etienne fresh. Keep him healthy. You got those fresh legs late in the game and the team's starting to get tired, and you give him the ball, he can then make an impact with chunk plays. Those big plays and those chunk plays will go a long way to making people feel like they're getting a return on their investment. Because make no mistake about it, the thing that they did when they picked him, they picked the most talented player they could from college. They picked a touchdown maker. They picked a guy who could do some things that there was nobody on this team even close to being able to do. And that's hit a home run and make big plays and change the game. From that perspective, I get it. Look, it could have been Kadarius Toney. So I understand. I understand. They broke a lot of rules when they used the first round pick on the running back. But I think what they did was they didn't necessarily just take a running back. They took explosiveness and talent. And you can argue until the day is long whether or not that was a good strategy. Here is where we're going to make it a good strategy. I'm going to tell you how it can be a good strategy. From this point forward, you have to retain him. And the only reason you can retain him is if he's playing well and he's a part of the identity of this team and he's healthy and he's not getting hit first like he has been all year. I mean, all for most of his career, especially last season. Team success. Him being a big part of that team success. Him being a part of the DNA, the identity of that team success. Him being one of the 7 or 8 best players on his team. Him being one of the 3 most explosive players on offense. And I do believe that. I even hear that they're talking about maybe putting him. We're talking about return on investment. That maybe he would even practice some in the return game. Maybe even in the return game, he'll practice. They got him back there. I don't think it's going to be something that they do on a regular basis. I think it could be one of those Darrell Green situations. If anybody remember Darrell Green from the old Washington teams back in the day, he would only go back there. Antonio Brown did it. He would go back there when they needed a big play. Big play, big moment, big game, or playoff game. You put the ball in your best player's hands. And I think, maybe they're exploring that a little bit. But all of those things, I think he's lived up to whatever it was we thought or we hoped that he would be. And the reason why I think he's lived up to it is because we had to wait for it, and we still like what we've seen. We had to wait a whole year. And normally, sometimes in certain situations, what that'll do is that'll ruin everything for you because you didn't get it the way you wanted it. It'll ruin your entire interpolation or entire way you look at the whole situation because it happened weird, right? You pick a guy in the first round, you want to see if he's worth it and see if he's valuable. And here he goes, he gets hurt and he doesn't play a down for you as a rookie. And now you're sitting here wondering, dang, man, was he worth it? Is he a good player? Or do we have to wait? And yeah, you had to wait. And then when you wait, it was worth it, right? I don't know anybody who doesn't think Travis Etienne was worth the wait once you saw him playing. So yeah, so far in the 2021 draft, there's another way you can look at this. And if you look at it like, okay, if they didn't exercise the 5th-year option on Travis Etienne and then they lose Walker Little and then maybe they don't work something out with one of those other guys, then you could look back and say that draft was kind of meh. Is that 2021? Is that how, yeah. Then you can look back and do that. But you can't really do that right now. You can't do it right now. And the reason why you can't do it is because he's been a pretty good player. He's been very, very good. What I think they have to do is they have to find a way to win a couple more of those games. And what I do believe that they've been able to do is get guys that can extend drives, guys like Gabe Davis, even though he's banged up right now. He still has the injury from when he was in Buffalo. Get guys that extend drives, get better play along the offensive line, especially up the middle. Give Trevor Lawrence bigger, stronger weapons, more weapons. I think they've done a lot of those things, and a lot of those things now it's just up to the players to go out and get it done. And I think Travis Etienne is going to have a real, real good year. I'm going to tell you why it's all about explosives, big plays in the passing, running game, and special teams. I'll tell you why that makes everything easier for the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll do it in just a second. Third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. I have to also let you know really, really fast, Locked On has launched the first ever national streaming. That's right, a national streaming channel. It is on YouTube and it is on the Amazon Fire TV, the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Look, man, if you're tired of all the yelling and the screaming on ESPN and Fox Sports, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming and yelling. It's Locked On Sports Today. Make sure you don't miss it with the can't miss analysis from local experts, including yours truly. Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you tap into Locked On Sports Today. All right, so Travis Etienne, his impact, I'm going to tell you right now, is incomplete, but I do believe because I understand, because I was here, I understand exactly what the Jaguars attempted to do by bringing Travis Etienne to the team. I do not think it was a bad decision. I think it was a good choice. I think he's lived up to it, even though he missed the whole season. But I think he has shown you what you want to see is the promise. You want to see it. That's all you want to see. You want to see the promise, man. You want to see, okay, I've had enough. I got a big enough sample size that I know that this dude is responsible, or this dude is a really, really good player and a really, really impactful player for this team. You notice I mentioned Alvin Kamara, but there have been some other guys. I think I mentioned Kamara. I mentioned Derrick Henry, who had the honor of being the identity for his team. Joe Mixon, who is now in Houston, but for a long time was in Cincinnati, was one of those guys. Because teams like Miami have so many different running backs, and you've seen some other systems be able to get guys that produce, that whole position of value thing really, really does mean something. But you have to remember where the Jaguars were when they took Travis Etienne. They were devoid of talent. They needed talent. They needed explosiveness. They needed the dude that could just run down on the field and score touchdowns. The Jaguars were very anemic offensively. They really, really, really needed some life, a name. And normally I don't like making selections and personnel moves and draft picks for stuff like what I just mentioned, like names and big picture stuff. But the bottom line is that's what they needed at the time. That's exactly what they needed. I wasn't opposed to the pick, even though it was a running back. I said he's an offensive weapon. I was thinking Alvin Kamara, Jamal Charles, those type players. And it turns out that's exactly what he kind of is. Think about Fred Taylor. You think about Maurice Jones-Drew, and I think now you think about Travis Etienne. Those are guys that, as Jaguar running backs, and now with Leonard Fournette, it's going to be a little bit different because he was playoff Lenny. He was a lot of things, but then a lot of people thought too, because of some narratives out there, that he was a part of that whole me portion of the ball club. He's a part of a big run too. We ain't gonna trip out on that. Don't make it seem like playoff Lenny wasn't a pure football player, because he was. It's just that we always talk about fit, and see, that was another time. At that time, the Jaguars wanted a big running back. That was the Tom Coughlin stuff. They need a big back, right? That's why I say I don't necessarily usually like doing that, like using personnel picks to try to just address this whole big thing instead of looking at it individually. But you have to sometimes. You have to put things in context and understand why teams did things that they do. I hope, though, what this leads to this year for the Jaguars, between Christian Kirk being healthy with his core injury, with Gabe Davis averaging 16.5, 17 yards a catch, with Evan Ingram now being on the consciousness of all the defensive coordinators, with BTJ, Brian Thomas Jr., and all of that speed and athleticism. By the way, he is the most athletic one of all of them. With all of those things I just mentioned, I really, really think the Jaguars are going to be a big play team. If the defense is improved and they start making even more big plays, and the sack numbers go up and they get real active, and the Jaguars are as good offensively as I think that they can be at the skill position, the skill positions, I really, really do believe that this team could be real explosive. In fact, I'll be shocked if they're not, because if they're not explosive, then that means that they got to be one of those teams that are going to grind people in the ground, and I just don't think that that's how they're built. I don't even think that's their mentality, even though I said the running game is super, super important. I think it's more or less a misdirection and the counters and using the speed and using formations, as opposed to it is just lining up with brute strength and knocking people off the ball. So I think the explosiveness, the big plays, what I believe is the more that they've improved this roster, I think you're going to see less touches for everybody. Evan Ingram's probably going to see the most decreases in touches of anybody on the team. And then I think you'll see Etienne next because I think they're going to pass the ball around. They're going to move the ball around. They're going to get more production out of their backup running backs. I do. I think they're going to be an explosive team that tries to spread the ball around a little bit. And it may mean less touches for some great players or some really good players that you're used to seeing touch the ball a lot. But it could mean more opportunities for those big plays. Less touches, but more productivity because, well, teams will have more to guard against. Teams will have more to guard against. Let's just say the word is not about stats. It's more about impact. For me, it's not about statistics. It's more about impact when it comes to Travis Etienne. So far, in my opinion, my assessment is I get why anybody says you don't take a running back that high. The fact that the Jaguars have exercised the fifth-year option and can still, after this year, go ahead and say, hey, man, let's give you 2 more years. Let's give you 2 years, $17 million. You won't guarantee it. Just put it on top of that. I'm telling you, with the way that this thing goes, him being 25 now, that means he'll be 27 when ultimately his contract runs out. If you extend him and try to say, hey, man, let's run this thing up until you're 29. See, that's how you start to get, even in today's world when running backs don't stay and retire from one team. If you use a first-round pick on a guy, I think you at least want to get 6-7 years, maybe 8 years out of him. And it really sounds bad when you say it like that because it sounds like you're using people up. But that's kind of what they do in the National Football League. So I think Travis Etienne has been worth it. And I think he's going to be worth it moving forward too. And wouldn't be surprised if he is a Jacksonville Jaguars for a player for another 4 years, especially if they get this thing to the point where they start winning. The Jaguars are always winning, man. That's right. And we are winning here on Locked On because we've launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. You guys make sure you keep it in the middle of the road. I will do the exact same thing, man, as we continue to go through the offseason here on Locked On Jaguars. Make sure you check it out here every single day at your team every day. We always thank you for making us your first listen. We'll be back with another episode on tomorrow. Take care.